This is going to be a strange episode. I wrote most of the show for last week, but at the behest of partners, I took a bit of a chill, planning to release it a few days late. Then everything just kept happening. The weirdo couch humper and the murderous warmonger cut off nationwide Medicaid funding under the guise of punishing Minnesota for standing up to ICE and Border Patrol. The same men threw a fit after Anthropic refused to allow their generative AI systems, famous for selecting the drop a nuke option in every wargame scenario, from having direct control over weapon systems without human intermediary. Only to 8 hours later, at 3 a.m. on the east coast of the US at least, and 11 a.m. in Iran, launch an illegal preemptive strike jointly with Israel against Iran. That strike timed to have several hours before most Americans were awake, but while most Iranian civilians would be out and about, hit a girls' elementary school and has killed at least 80 people, mostly children, at the time of writing. During Obama's presidency, itself filled with civilian murders performed by drone, the continued use of the ever-so-dissociated U.S. torture camp Gitmo, capitulation to the same banks who caused and in fact profited from the subprime housing bubble, which almost destroyed the global economy in 2009, and the expansion of the Democrat-backed immigration and minority crackdowns. Iran signed a nuclear weapon non-proliferation treaty and has been following it, despite the fact that Trump pulled the US out of it, just like he did with the Paris Accord to combat climate collapse. And frankly, most other treaties signed under Obama or Biden. And like I said, despite the fact that Iran continued to follow the treaty which the other signer had pulled out of, despite its brutal authoritarian regime, which no one is denying, but it is very important to point out that regime is in place because the US's intervention on multiple occasions over the last 50 years, usually attempting to remove leaders and then leaving the place to be swarmed by the worst kind of fascists possible. I wonder why. And like the fabrications of the younger murderous Bush, the excuse was weapons of mass destruction, WMDs. This is the second massive illegal military strike Trump has undertaken on a Saturday in 2026 under the same justification. Remember? Kidnapping the leader of Venezuela and murdering Cubans and Venezuelans alike was done under the auspices of Trump's declaration of a painkiller as a WMD, before trying Maduro for trafficking in a completely different drug. And yet, somehow, all of that still feeds into the exact same theme from my original script. So, let's get to that. If the subjective decade we've all been experiencing as the last, or I guess first, 8 weeks of 2026 can be said to have a theme, it would be Cassandra, the mythical Greek priestess cursed with utterly true prophecies which would never be believed by Apollo after she wouldn't sleep with him in his own Cassandritic prophecy of the cultural reaction to Me Too. Every trans girl, woman of color, and sex worker who has spent the last 2 decades raising the alarm about where our global, federal, and state, and frankly, in many cases, municipal policies have been headed was right, and no one listened. This isn't an I told you so, though. The marginalized are the canaries in the coal mines. It helps if you listen to us, but to stretch the metaphor, there's still time to turn back and give the bird CPR. There's an argument to be made, which I did in this essay from 2025, that the miraculous ability for trans women to produce perfect but utterly dismissed prophecies is just pattern recognition grown from being the outgroup exploited in order to maintain certain systems. It's much easier to see the ways a system is built to cause harm and enforce existing authority when you're the one it's initially built to exclude. But as the ones it's considered socially acceptable to exclude, we are also more likely to be dismissed when we bring up those issues. It's almost like systems of power, like patriarchy, repeatedly use the same tools in the same way to enforce a preferable, to their mind at least, world. If you look at the Wikipedia page for Cassandra right now, it will explain Apollo, a god, but more importantly, a man, cursed Cassandra for reneging on a deal to have sex with him. It is at best hand-waving away the complexity of a myth with myriad variants, and at worst, performing apologelia for a coercive rape by a god and a man in a society which saw women as kin to animals and property. The first woman to openly come forward as a survivor of Epstein's child sexual trafficking was a trans woman, Ava Cordero. For her trouble, Epstein's contacts in the media, the New York Post and the New York Times in particular, outed her on the national stage and mocked her as though the abuse she suffered was funny because it happened to a trans woman. Not that the abuse was fine or anything about that. No, it was just that it was funny because she claimed someone would want to do it to her. Now, as the Epstein Files are trickled out by Trump's DOJ, they redact the names and images of the adults who fraternized with convicted child rapist Epstein and his girls, while unredacted pictures of victims, their previously protected names, are out on display or falsely redacted. It's almost like the Epstein class have developed a repeatable pattern of re-traumatizing and mocking their victims, especially women, for daring to demand justice, going as far back as the Trojan War. And welcome to Muttday Morning News. I'm the titular Mutt Fen. Now let's get to some news. First up, this was going to be a nice quick story because I saw this Al Jazeera headline and just had to figure out what the hell it was on about. It's a bit of a huge deal when land, much less a building, owned by the federal government is being sold. That's not the sort of thing a government does, except as a dubiously legal method of bribing a private citizen or a company on an ongoing basis. Seriously, before I even explain the terminal velocity brain spiral unpicking this caused me, let's just address that bit first. Why would the government sell land and a building it owns outright to a private individual who'd then rent it back to them? This is a global imperialist government we're talking about. A few $1 million, even a few $100 million, dropped into the coffers suddenly is just that, a drop in the bucket. See also why the whole thing about invading Venezuela and kidnapping Maduro for a grand total of $500 million in oil was also bullshit. It's a short-term gain on paper, which doesn't actually matter to the people who can literally print money, but does oblige subsequent governments to keep the bribe going or lose access to, say, the Pentagon. It's the sort of bribe which only works in a country like the US with less an opposition party and more a party of basketball refs trying to find a rule that says dogs can't play basketball instead of just blowing their whistles, aka neoliberals. But it's also really obvious there would be records. So I knew this headline couldn't be correct. First, the two property deals were proposed in 2016 by Jonathan D. Fesatelli, a billionaire real estate mogul operating mostly in New York at the time with generously dubious authority to even propose the sales he was pitching to Jeffrey Epstein through David Stern, one of former Prince Andrew's aides, which Epstein never responded to, actually remarkably out of character for him. He responded to everything. Second, while one proposal was for the first Trump administration to sell convicted child rapist Jeffrey Epstein an FBI office in 2016, the other was not for the Pentagon, but a 101,312 square yard building a mile from the Pentagon, a fact I learned from a quote in the second knotting sentence of this article. And no, I did not misspeak. I was quoting the Al Jazeera article written by Al Jazeera staff and presumably their new slop bot, The Core, where a once prestigious journalistic enterprise managed to misspell the word square immediately after spelling it correctly. The problem is, That's not actually the bulk of the article. No, instead, most of it was wild speculation about Epstein being a Mossad agent based on an FBI report in the Epstein Files, which it doesn't link to or include. So I went to go see if I could find it, and I did. EFTA 0009031 and 15 and 16. Some of you likely recall the other FBI memo I've mentioned, the one where an alleged Epstein survivor described her trafficking by Epstein at 13, as well as the murder and disposal of her daughter she gave birth to while being trafficked, which she also alleged Donald Trump witnessed. Yeah, this is not that. This is an FBI memo, which is also a confidential human source report, but not from an alleged Epstein survivor. No, this was submitted by someone claiming to run in Epstein's social circles, who's pushing an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory to the FBI agent who just let him go off from the comments and claimed connections to Epstein, Trump, and the Kushners. I'm assuming he, but it is anonymous. In the same document, the CHS claims Alan Dershowitz, Epstein's lawyer, wasn't a Mossad agent, but was an asset and a believer in their cause, and thus alleged nearly anyone and everyone with connections to the ridiculously prolific lawyer who happens to work for the worst people on earth, who all happen to be friends with each other, was actually acting as a Mossad recruiter instead. The CHS eventually goes into full conspiracy theorist, claiming everything in the Epstein network and the first Trump administration all tie back to a plot by a Chabad Jewish sect who the CHS claimed already control Israel and Russia to co-opt the US. See, this is the issue with listening, much less citing, a conspiracy theorist instead of Cassandritic minorities. They sound almost believable. Heck, many of the details are even true, but their conclusions are faulty. Yes, Alan Dershowitz had access to both the Epstein class of society and their children, who are foundationally also part of the Epstein class. That's not because there's a massive Jewish conspiracy, it's because he was born into that class. He's the kind of man who was always going to run in that society unless he ran screaming away from it. He was a spoiled little shit who got into prep school before going to Yale Law School. He was the youngest ever full professor at Harvard Law at the time he was 28. His first job out of law school was clerking for a chief judge in the DC Court of Appeals. He's not a tool in a secret Israeli-Russian Chabad conspiracy. He's an oligarch. He's rich, a blue blood, born with a silver spoon in his mouth, a patriarch, one of the Epstein class. Not because he's Jewish, but because he's rich, and that power comes with association with those who are using it the same way you are. Just to contextualize this, while Alan Dershowitz was pivotal to Jeffrey Epstein's sweetheart 13-month work release deal in 2008 for, again, raping and trafficking a single child despite the FBI having evidence of at least 36 victims at the time, he's represented many more monsters, even more alleged child rapists who had no connections with Israel. Because writing, recording, and editing these shows takes way too much time, I'll keep it short and just mention the demons from his Wikipedia page. Dershowitz was on O.J. Simpson's defense during the murder trial, but not the wrongful death suit he lost. Dershowitz was part of the prolific Hollywood rapist Harvey Weinstein's legal team, Julian Assange's 2011 legal team, and Donald Trump's impeachment team. Fun fact, he's the dude who said, if a president does something which he believes will help him get elected in the public interest, that cannot be the kind of quid pro quo that results in impeachment. What a fascinating way to translate Nixon's most famous quote into legalese. And the one I'm saving for last, Dershowitz got Kiratanananda Swami, a defrocked Hare Krishna guru, off on an appeal based on the argument the jury was biased against him by the child rape allegations against him, which he was not formally charged with. Full context here, dude was convicted on racketeering and mail fraud charges and charged with conspiring to have two opposing Krishna leaders killed after they threatened to publicly reveal his sexual abuse of children. Did you see a theme in those clients? Maybe you could argue that they're all men, though I did very specifically pick the men. There were at least a few women that he represented as well, and he's been a lawyer for decades and has represented plenty of evil women as well. You could argue they're all abusers, they're all wealthy, but it's almost like he's just a high society political lawyer who's been working since 1962 and not part of a weird, obsessive anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Again, this is the problem with platforming, even unknowingly or unawareedly, a conspiracy theorist. Even when they sound almost sane, they're actually hyperfixated on their singular issue. In this case, Alan Dershowitz and Jeffrey Epstein's connections to Israel, or alleged connections, by assuming that all Jewish people have a connection to Israel, and assuming that everything they do pushes the assumed conspiracy's goals. Why am I shredding this one Al Jazeera article so deeply? Well, first because I had to read it, then figure out why a previously reputable news source like Al Jazeera would publish a lie in a headline and then an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Second, because I think it's important to note and explain the differences between a conspiracy theory where all the evil in the world can be traced back to a single network, be it a company, a single person, or a single agency like Mossad, the CIA, the FBI, whatever. And those pointing out the ways powerful people benefit from existing systems and thus have a vested interest in maintaining them. The point of using phrases like the Epstein class is not to associate them specifically with Epstein, though yes, obviously to an extent that is the goal. It is more so to focus on the fact that this was the person enabling all of this, and most likely someone has risen up to replace him. To that end, let me ask you this simple question and immediately expand upon it. Would it matter if Epstein had been a Mossad agent? Would it change anything about his crimes, about the people who protected him, who made his victims their own? Or would being a Mossad agent merely provide bigots justification to blame Israel or Jewish people for those crimes by proxy? That's how you can tell it's a conspiracy theory. It shifts the focus and the blame away from Epstein, Dershowitz, Trump, Maxwell, the Clintons, Bill Gates, Bobby Kotick, former Prince Andrew, the Kushner brothers, David and Larry Ellison, and all of Epstein's other contacts, and what they did to women and children, and instead tries to blame it on a faceless entity of Mossad and Israel. It's all because Epstein was a Mossad agent. All these wealthy, powerful men and women are pawns in Israel's hand. It's all a cabal of global Jews. Donald Trump is a puppet in their hands, so he can't be held responsible for Epstein connections he's been denying existed for years, while murdering children. Who cares? That's it. That's why it's a conspiracy theory. The reality of it is this. Jeffrey Epstein was a wealthy financier who raped and abused women and children. He had a lot of high society friends, many who also raped and abused women and children. The rest didn't see those qualities as deal breakers for friendship. Those people should face consequences for their actions. Some are certainly members of the Israeli military community and government. Many are members of the United States government and the UK government, and several European governments. And let's not forget the thousands of business executives and the New York Times reporters and all of the academics. It's almost like treating whole classes of people, especially minorities, women, and children, as subhuman objects who can have their rights dictated to them is one of the inherent rights of the rich and powerful, or at least the one that they have decided that they have awarded themselves by virtue of being the rich and powerful in a patriarchal capitalist society. And that's where this story was going to end, but then that fucking ex-Blackwater mercenary, World War II history buff who claimed to not know he wore the mark of the Nazi death camp guards on his skin for 14 years, despite multiple former friends reporting he'd called it his Totenkopf in a cutesy voice while drunk, who covered said Nazi symbol with a Nordic knot, which totally has no Nazi associations at all, whose wife inexplicably kept bringing up how great his sperm was without any prompting while announcing on a tour that they were going to Norway for fertility treatments, and somehow still a Democrat primary candidate for one of Maine's Senate seats, said the same shit live on TV.
I think a lot of us have understood for a long time that there is a class of people that exist above accountability, that exists kind of above even like the concept of the nation state.
Before sharing and eventually deleting this post by another neo-Nazi anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist, Stu Peters, and forcing me to learn he'd also done an interview in January with Nate Kranachia, who's recently been pushing the oft-reheated conspiracy theory Israel orchestrated X-killing, in this case obviously Charlie Kirk's, on his YouTube channel Valhalla VFT. Again, it's almost like neo-Nazis have a thing for association with Norse and Odinist religious iconography, but who cares? Which Plattner claimed to be a longtime fan of. Can we please stop pretending Graham Plattner is anything besides a Nazi using the groundswell of simultaneous support for Nazis on the right and communists on the left to be the next John Fetterman? And let's not forget the rising tide of global anti-Semitism actually benefits Israel's genocidal settler state government. How does global anti-Semitism benefit Bibi the Butcher and his ilk running Israel? Well, fun fact, a lot of Jewish diaspora oppose the genocide in Gaza, decry Israel's myriad crimes, especially their habit of leaving child sexual abuse crimes uninvestigated. Again, a running theme among powerful individuals that doesn't actually have any direct ties to, say, specific entities and just is a key element of patriarchy. Weird. And almost categorically reject Israel's claim to speak for all Jewish people as a class and as an authority on their shared religion. In fact, while I was writing this show, Israel actually decided that they, as a government which claims to not have a direct tie with religion, though still claims to have control and ability to dictate Jewish practices across the world, now made it illegal to pray in non-approved ways in Israel, even if you are visiting. Building anti-Semitism while conflating what is really anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism serves to turn societies against the Jewish diaspora within their midst, eventually forcing them to fend for themselves or fall in with Israel's beliefs and policies for their own protection. It's almost clever. I pointed it out when I was reporting on the mass shooting on Bondi Beach in December. Bibi himself did the conflation, and then the Australian government ran with it, claiming the men who'd been motivated by anti-Semitism were actually pro-Palestinian, anti-Zionist terrorists, and because he's the Prime Minister of Israel, it became the accepted narrative, despite all evidence to the contrary. You can even see the bias in how Bibi assumed only another Jewish person would run toward gunfire to help his Jewish neighbors, like Ahmed al-Ahmed, a Muslim, did. The problems with our world do not all trace back to a single minority group, a single country, a single person, or even several working in the shadows. They trace back to the people in the Epstein class, the people convinced it is their inherent right as powerful, rich people to do what they want to those they have declared lesser. And as powerful people who are friends with other powerful people guilty of the same exploitations, they do not have to worry about consequences. Once in a while, there might be a sacrificial lamb, an Epstein, a Cosby, but just as often there's a reactionary movement redirecting the focus often into a conspiracy theory which directs the ire at a minority group. Sometimes they even make it up themselves. But there are so many other examples. Gamergate, the reaction to Me Too, the Tea Party movement, MAGA and its aggravating to pronounce incestuous death cult twin, MAHA, QAnon, Flat Earth, or the old standby dog whistles for "it was totally the Jewish people," lizard people, shadowy cabals, those suspicious folks who control the media, as though David Zaslav, Rupert Murdoch, and Larry and David Ellison own or run the majority of the Anglosphere media not owned by Disney and Jeff Bezos by virtue of being Jewish and not because they're all repugnant levels of wealthy it's impossible to achieve without stealing the combined labor of millions. For the record, in my script, this is where the second story actually begins. That was unquestionably the longest segment I have ever written. Yikes. Well, that Cassandra theme, remember how I said it's not really minorities being prophetic and ignored, but us demonstrating pattern recognition, then being ignored for systemic reasons? Well, Panyas Lesufi, the premier of Gauteng province of South Africa, decided to make himself another perfect example. Most residents of Johannesburg, the richest city in Africa and the capital of the province, have been without running water for more than 3 weeks, due largely to municipal infrastructure neglect for myriad reasons, but they all come down to money, greed, and profit. In an attempt to commiserate with the people it was his responsibility to protect from an extremely avoidable crisis, he said, "People think that when there is no water, we and our families have special water. We don't. We also suffer the same pain. In some instances, I had to go to a hotel so that I could bathe and go to my commitments." You can see how it almost seemed like a decent statement and how he really thought he was connecting with people. And then he just had to finish with, "let them shower in hotels." I can't decide if this is more Tracy Jordan losing connection with his roots or Lucille Bluth, "what could a banana cost" energy. Either way, it's another example of the repeating pattern of the rich and powerful becoming completely dissociated from the experiences of their people. Oh, it's like that face Hillary Clinton made that one time she was in a normal ass apartment. You know, this one, where you can see she's just wondering where the rest of the closet is, only as she's realizing that, no, this is what most of us live with. Last story of obedience training, and in the script, I have this story just titled Trump, and it's just crap from the week of February 16th, not even the unhinged crap he's done in the last few days that I touched on in the intro. Like, how do I even report on the conservative as all get out US Supreme Court declaring Trump's tariffs illegal and unconstitutional in a 6-3 decision, only for the dictator to claim he was applying a 10% tariff to all countries in addition to those already in place, which journalists have been reporting as though the Supreme Court hadn't just ruled he can't do that? How do I even talk about the Trump administration gutting the Internet Freedom Program, which funded local-level archiving and communication developments under oppressive censorship regimes, only to relaunch it as freedom.gov, a portal run by the Department of Homeland Security, naturally, to allow users in countries which have blocked, for example, X for violating their anti-Nazi and anti-CSAM laws to continue to access them? How do I even talk about the double dog irony of Trump posting to his own social media site he was sending a hospital boat to Greenland, a country with socialized medicine, only for that boat to turn out to be a fucking nuclear submarine? That's a very normal thing to station near one of your allies, secretly, who you've been repeatedly threatening to invade. But how do we know it was a nuclear sub? Well, because one of the sailors aboard the hospital boat nuclear sub had to be medevaced to Greenland. The real problem with reporting on the shit Trump does and orders, it all sounds like I'm making shit up. Like he might have called into C-SPAN under the regular pseudonym John Barron to whine about the Supreme Court's tariff ruling. That one is last, since we live in hell, and Trump's voice is an extremely common AI generation, so it really might not have been him. I'll go so far as to say it probably wasn't him. Can you honestly see Trump, the man who was late to his own peace board meeting and spent half the time he was there asleep, watching C-SPAN, I can't. And since this video took forever and is more than an hour and a half, well, almost an hour and a half long, editing me can say, hey, it definitely wasn't. We know for sure it wasn't, because the time between writing and recording and editing screwed me over. But hey, yeah, it wasn't him at all. We know for sure, and here's C-SPAN explaining it. Oh, we're out of obedience training and into Hound's Bite. So, how was the tech news this week? Oh, yikes, right. Yeah, generative AI is going great. As Cameron Lauder wrote and Graham Stark said on Checkpoint last week, everything is computer now. It's certainly been convenient, of a sort, but everything being computer is a problem when the data storage, memory, and graphics card manufacturing for all of 2026 has already been spoken for, pre-purchased by GenAI companies with money they didn't have for data centers that don't exist for AI customers who also don't exist, as the pedophilic predictive keyboards have an increasingly poor reputation with everyone who doesn't speak management standard English. Remember the Unity runtime fee debacle of 2023-2024? Yeah, while that would have been a hellscape for game developers, they were gravy. John Riccitiello pushed for a per installation fee because many car companies make their dashboard and infotainment center UIs in Unity. Riccitiello wanted to be paid a fee for every Mercedes, Toyota, and, well, everything their software was installed on. Everything is computer now. It's bad when we can't replace those parts. And exactly then, what do we get for allowing Gen AI companies to consume incomprehensible sums of money, water, power, and accepting massive swaths of infrastructure and technology will break with no replacement parts in the coming years? Chatbots, which are little more than pedophilic predictive keyboards. Chatbots which produce mountains of CSAM. Chatbots openly biased towards their creators' claims against actual observable evidence. Chatbots which keep sexualizing children, which keep pushing people into paranoid delusions, pushing them towards murder, towards suicide, all while their owners advertise them as therapists. Let's see, what exactly happened in GenAI specifically this week? Well, how about I use Microsoft as a perfect example? Remember how like a week or two ago, there was a Windows 11 Notepad exploit after Copilot was forcibly added? It was the one where Copilot could give a hacker complete control over your PC because you opened a text file with a command prompt Copilot automatically interpreted as a prompt for it because it was. Yeah, this week, TechCrunch and Bleeping Computer reported on a bug. Personally, I'd call it a violation of privacy law and the privacy policies Windows 11 users agreed to, not a bug, which had been present at least since January. Copilot has been intaking and summarizing all Outlook emails, even those under data loss prevention policies, which forbid Microsoft's generative AI from processing them. If you're not boiled in how these Azathoth ex machina work, and think I'm making a big deal out of something as simple as summarizing some emails, let me explain. Generative AI doesn't think. In order to summarize something, it compares the thing it's summarizing to documents with enough similarity tags in its massive database, which means it needs to also put the thing it's summarizing into its database. It's like how NFTs as an artistic medium could never actually create digital scarcity as they claimed, because in order to display the images, your computer has to download them. And drawing another issue from blockchains, nothing can be removed from LLM databases. So all those proprietary emails with potential company secrets, well, those are now in the database every single instance of Copilot has access to. Yay! And lest you think Microsoft's regurgitative chatbot doesn't also spread misinformation and plagiarism like all the rest, last week a Blue Sky user caught this utterly bizarre chart on a Copilot written guide to GitHub flow. You'll note this graph is attributed, while the rest of the images in here aren't. Yeah, that's because This was originally an illegible, broken AI regurgitation of this graph, which Vincent Dresian created in 2010, shortly after Git launched as part of his dev blog, explaining what is now one of the most common development workflows, because that's what generative AI does. It takes existing work and makes it look a little different. It doesn't make new things. It takes existing ones and changes them so you can't tell where it was stolen from. It's not better. It's not more accurate. It's just different, which in fact means it's almost always wrong. And see, this is what I mean about pattern recognition. Generative AI as a product is repeating a pattern we've seen before. The wannabe tech gentry and full-blown techno-fascists like human charisma vacuum Elon Musk and alleged rapist of his own little sister Sam Altman have repeatedly tried to recreate the 2009 subprime loan crash with themselves in the position of the banks too big to be allowed to fail. They did so by creating products like crypto, like NFTs, like the nebulous all-encompassing hand wave that was the metaverse. Products we were all obliged to like and use, or at least so they argued, and make a core part of our lives, not because they're useful or because they fill a niche, not because they make something easier, but because they're definitely going to be the next big thing. And you'd be a fool for not getting in on the ground floor. Say, I wonder how the combination lube Viagra potions that were Axie Infinity's cryptocurrency are doing. They were the next big thing everyone just had to get in on or risk missing out. Remember, some folks even managed to make more than the minimum wage in the Philippines by playing the Pokemon clone. Well, from their 2021 high of 35 cents, smooth love potions are currently at... Oh. Well, damn, they lost even more value than Tumblr after Yahoo decided it had to become the next PDF. Oh, hey, look, there's another example. It's not prophecy, it's pattern recognition. Tech executives are never happy with maintaining existing users. They want more. All the users. Their proprietary machine must be as necessary and ubiquitous as PDFs, as .text files. But they never actually have the revolutionary ideas to back up that theoretical demand. I'll admit, at this point, it almost feels like beating a dead horse, but I've already brushed another pattern GenAI is repeating from crypto, so I might as well flesh it out more. Remember how crypto was losing momentum as a cultural movement? Bitcoin taken here stickers weren't really doing it anymore, and suddenly, oh, well, here are NFTs, a new, true method of creating true digital scarcity and making ownership more meaningful. Unique to the blockchain. Well, unique to each individual blockchain. We just have to hope that the one that we've set up on ends up being the overall winner. And suddenly, we all had to hear about people buying concepts like the first meme or the first tweet. Hey, remember how Seth Green gave a hacker $300,000 to return his stolen Bored Ape Yacht Club NFT because not having it in his possession raised questions as to whether he could legally create White Horse Tavern, an animated show following Fred Green's ape picture, which never aired even after he spent the $300,000 ransom? Well, do you remember when NFTs were on the outs after all the scams ruined their image and suddenly everyone was building a metaverse? Like Horizon Worlds from Facebook, when they literally changed their name to Meta, or Decentraland, or the ones which never even made it to 3D game spaces but still let you buy virtual land plots in an artificially scarce digital landscape, which still somehow had to tie into a blockchain, like Earth 2, Earth Meta, Next Earth. They also weren't very creative with names. None of them, crypto at the base level, NFTs, or their version of the metaverse added any benefit to their current users or had anything to do with the product they'd thus far pushed. Save that those who'd already held their proprietary cryptocurrencies would be the first to get to buy the new markets at rock bottom prices, and thus able to sell them at ridiculous markups to the users drawn in by the new thing inexplicably bolted onto any given blockchain. Remember how generative AI kinda sucked because they were just chatbots and useless unless you craved a fawning sycophant or were feeling nostalgic for the days of tricking Cleverbot into saying something horny? Well, then it could read and summarize the millions of emails we all deal with daily. It's really bad at it, and it's a privacy nightmare, and really just highlights how much spam we all get. Ditto a few months later, when suddenly every generative AI system had an image generator. You can use it to extend paintings because having more background around Mona Lisa makes it easier to ignore Da Vinci was such an egg. The girly pup is most well known for a painting that's been alleged to actually be a self-portrait of her as a woman. And then we did it again with the video engines like the magnificent money-burning Sora 2, because we just all needed the ability to fake anything badly in 8-second segments rather than, I don't know, using the surprisingly high-quality cameras we almost all have to film something intentionally for the fun of it. Seriously, have you ever just sat down and gone, I want to film something for fun and to try it? Do it. You can. It's great. Well, the video engines, image generators, CSAM, email summaries haven't sold 2 billion people on paying for ChatGPT like OpenAI's profitability reports require. So here we are with agentic AIs, an invention by and for executives and those who want to emulate them, an invention that assumes we're all too stupid to book plane tickets or use a GPS or buy a waffle iron off a website ourselves. It's just more features that don't work stapled onto the core product because maybe this one will pull everyone in before we're out of cash. Look, I want and feel obliged to talk about the horrifying new persona age verification information as well as the same issues spinning up in a big new agentic AI Moltbot, but I don't have the time or, frankly, the brain to destroy. Short version, on the Discord persona age verification front, it's bad. Hackers discovered the whole backend was accessible, that Persona systems grabbed tons of information, including IDs, and centralized them into a nice, convenient, thievable bundle, and worse, it's rigged to run your ID and facial information through myriad federal agency databases, dropping us in there if we weren't already. Oh, and several financial institutions as well, just for good measure. Additionally, it's been reported Discord discontinued the partnership. That is true, but only because I had to edit this story at noon on February 24th. Before that point, multiple sources said the Persona deal was discontinued, but had no source for that. On the 24th, Discord put out a press release which charitably makes no sense. In it, Stanislav Vincheski, a co-founder and the CTO of Discord, so a man due to become a grillionaire after Discord's IPO if they can get those sweet AI speculator investor dollars, doubled down on a commitment to child abuse and data theft enabling face scanning age verification. He claimed all the data sent to Persona, which their privacy policy previously said would never leave our local devices, which we also know is a lie because of the hack of 70,000 Australian user IDs last year, was totally absolutely deleted after the test, which totally only ran in the UK for a few days, which is why it was set up to run the faces, including children's, and IDs it scanned past hundreds of US, not UK, law enforcement and banking databases, who also totally deleted your info. Discord is still pushing the exact same policy, albeit delaying and currently not planning on using Peter Thiel's persona. They're treating us like the lobotomized wallets they think we all are, hoping, let's be honest, assuming, we'll all rush out to re-up our Nitro subscriptions so they look nice and profitable for that confidential IPO they filed for in January, which will have to go public eventually. Oh, and a late addition, Twitch, apparently following their policy of copying everything famed pedophile hellscape Roblox does, has also rolled out Persona as an entirely unnecessary age verification step for new affiliates. There's a link in the description to a user voice post to make your opinion heard on that. I didn't write this into my script, but I'm going to include one very quick thing here about the fundamental issue with age verification. We have a system for dealing with bad actors within digital spaces. They're reports. The problem is not age verification, but the fact that we are not using our report systems. I'm not saying that people aren't reporting things. I'm saying that, as we've seen from, say, that Meta court case, Meta's own stated policy required that someone be reported for sexualizing and harassing children 17 times before action was taken. The issue is not that we do not have tools to deal with those who are trying to abuse children. It's that these tools, age verification, are not intended to protect children. They are intended to provide swaths of data and control information. We could just act on reports. Instead, we live in a hell world where the reports of those sexualizing, abusing, and harassing children are ignored, but the mass reports of a woman showing the barest amount of skin, those get responded to. But we are not quite done with the tech news, because I started with Microsoft's repeated AI bugs for a reason. Phil Spencer, the CEO of Microsoft Gaming, announced last week, mere days before the day itself, that he'd be retiring on February 23rd. Xbox president Sarah Bond, who'd long been considered next in line for Spencer's job, also announced that she was leaving. If I had to guess why, I'd suggest it might be that she's a black woman with pattern recognition at the top of Microsoft and can see she's being set up as the scapegoat for what Microsoft and their AI are about to do and already have done to our world, to computing, and to gaming. Or maybe she was passed over for Asha Sharma, the president of Microsoft's Core AI. Or maybe it's a bit of column A and a bit of column B. Or maybe it's the utterly absurd, baseless story where somehow Sarah Bond is responsible for the entire negative perception of modern Xbox. No, it's not. That's absurd. What? One way or another, I'm sure putting an AI executive in charge of the largest gaming company as AI destroys modern computing as we know it is going to go fine. Oh, she's also a creepy forced birther natalist who thinks Microsoft's AI systems, currently being used to help murder Palestinians, will fix declining birth rates as though that's actually a pressing issue for anyone who's not lost in the hyper-racist, white nationalist great replacement theory. Yeah, sure it will. This seems like a perfect time to remind you, dear viewer, that Microsoft is a priority target of the BDS boycott. One last Houndsbite story, and this one is mostly for my Colorado girly pups, because it's time to raise hell, but I just learned that Newsom signed a version of this bill in California already, and there's a federal bill involved in this story too, so let's get started. I know we're all celebrating Palantir's announcement that they are pulling their HQ out of Denver for Miami, where, goddess willing, they will fall into the sea somehow, along with all of their data centers and money, hopefully, but I'm just dreaming at this point. The neoliberal twits in our state legislature decided to use the opportunity to push one of the worst age verification laws in the country. At least until I learned that California had already done the same, which had been signed by Newsom because Trump 3.0 Newsom is a fascist. Please listen when we point this out. State Senator Matt Ball and State Representative Amy Paschal proposed SB 26-051, aka Age Attestation on Computing Devices, in the Colorado State Legislature. The bill requires not app, site, or service level age verification, but OS level. as written, it would sort of work, with normal age verification, well, with all of the already existing age verification issues for walled garden environments like iOS, where installing apps must be done through a fixed app store, but the second side loading is an option, like on Android, or, actually what Apple is supposed to be doing after a court case in Europe last year, but that actually might have been 2024. They're very good about not following up on their European court cases. Or, God forbid, the legislative hellscape that would be enforcing this on Linux, which, yes, of course, that's what the California bill is going to have to now try and do too, where Linux users and developers just somehow need to take part in this. I'm sure it'll work great. You can definitely enforce this. And, as I will always remind folks, age verification does nothing to protect children from predatory adults, who are more often their family, or those in positions of authority like priests or the Epstein class, or are a sheltered class of users who service providers actually want to keep because they spend money. See Roblox calling their pedophile hellscape an opportunity. And Meta's recent testimony, which showed its own fixed policy, was that adult users needed to be caught and reported making unwanted sexualizing comments to children more than 17 times before policy mandated any action. No. Age verification serves to hide information and potential community from children so they are easier to abuse and indoctrinate. It does not protect them. Following up on reports instead of making them take 17 verifications would actually help, which is a tool we could be using right now. We're just not. Let me frame it this way. Notice how the few folks seeing consequences for their open crimes in the Epstein Files are not seeing consequences for abusing those children, but for financial crimes, or the consequences they're facing are merely social, not in any way punitive or criminal. If the goal is to keep children safe, the focus would be on following up on reports and removing those who do the harm. Instead, age verification cuts children off from the communication with even each other in case an adult might use the same service. Or, to reframe it one more time, we've all been teens. We know they're curious and horny. It's our responsibility as adults to leave teenage horniness to themselves and gently reject them if they direct that energy towards us. It's the responsibility of guardians of teens to keep them safe, not sheltered, not closeted, not hidden from information, but safe. A teen is not made safe because you hide that gay and trans people exist. They're not made safe by pretending sex doesn't exist or it's some mystical thing. It can still be important and meaningful. That's the difference between a taboo and a healthy conversation around a human experience. Or, that's where this story would have ended, but 17 Republicans in the federal House of Representatives co-sponsored a federal version of Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, H.R. 7661, which would define discussing the existence of gay or trans people as content harmful to minors, banning discussion of our very existence from schools or places not covered by some kind of age verification. Just like age verification bills, the point is not to protect children, but to cut them off from information. I knew I was a girl who liked other girls when I was 5, but I didn't know the words gay, lesbian, or trans. Not knowing them didn't save me from being bullied for being feminine. It didn't stop my father from beating me when I told him I wanted to be a girl. It just taught me to hide my true feelings until he was dead. If you live in Arizona, California, Connecticut, Florida, Illinois, Indiana, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Utah, or Guam, at least one of your representatives is in the House Committee on Education and Workforce, now shepherding this hateful bill, and you have the power to harangue them via email, phone calls, or even physical letters. Please, please feel free to use that right. The point of having elected representatives is for them to represent you. If this is not something you want, it is your right and, frankly, your responsibility within a democracy to tell them and make it clear that you won't vote for them if they don't actually meet your personal requirements. That's the point of a representative democracy, is laying out these requirements for our representatives and saying, if you don't move to meet my requirements, I don't have to vote for you. I can find someone who will meet my requirements, or I can push those myself by running myself. No, I'm not personally that invested in trying to save our electoral democracy because I think it's kind of screwed, but provided we're acting like the system works, act like the system works. And we are done with the tech news. Onto gaming and culture with Pet Play. I've only got 2 stories in Pet Play, but in my defense, I kind of went long on everything else this week, including one of these 2 stories. Oops. So, let's get started. I know I made that Mona Lisa joke 2 segments ago, but while writing the show, I learned the Da Vinci was a model for Mona Lisa and its natural outgrowth, Da Vinci was a trans woman, theories are apparently not that well known even among trans girls, so hey, I get to tell you about them, and I thought it would be fun too. There were 2 schools of artists and historians pushing the theory back in the early aughts. One school originated with Susan Dorothy White, who went on a proto-turfy, we can always tell, transvestigation using the inherently racist facsimile of science, phrenology, to argue Mona Lisa's facial bones, especially her forehead and jaw, were too masculine to have used a woman as a model, but sure. Lillian Schwartz, a scientist at Bell Labs in the aughts, took a more scientific approach, comparing Mona Lisa to another alleged Da Vinci self-portrait, Portrait of a Man in Red Chalk, which lines up surprisingly well after you remove presumably Da Vinci's beard and fluffy eyebrows. And just to add a silly detail to that, besides the obvious that repressed trans girls tend to let their beards and facial hair do whatever, only to shave and, if they have fuzzy eyebrows like that, pluck religiously once they come out, there's also been a prevalent theory pushed by art historians and engineers that Mona Lisa had not insignificant eyebrows and lashes, which were either erased or painted over at some point. How about something from this century? Oh, wait, shit. Neopets launched in 1999. Shush. I'm working on a more dedicated video on this, especially because the story keeps developing. But I alluded to it last week. More happened this week, and it's once again a Cassandritic pattern, which has been ignored. So, hey, have you heard about the Neopets TTRPG? I'm not going over the whole affair, like I said, working on a dedicated video, but to Cole's notes it for you. In July, Geekify launched a Kickstarter for an official licensed Neopets TTRPG, asking for $40,000 to produce a physical core rulebook and an extension, The Fall of Fairyland. Geekify implied the game system was built, the books themselves were mostly written, and highlighted their focus not on combat, but socialization, crafting, exploration, the more absurdist elements of Neopia, like eggs, pets, and the preponderance of minigames and puzzles. They hit the original goal in less than 2 days. When it was all said and done, the Kickstarter raised more than 10 times the initial goal, sitting pretty with some 425,000 USD, funding the core project and a whopping 12 stretch goals. Early this month, backers and the wider internet finally saw the first playtest on February 4th. And surprising no one who's aware of Geekify, it was bad, really bad, like impressively shit. I mean, for one thing, you know how I said they launched this Kickstarter in July? Yeah, that was July 2024. The physical rewards were supposed to go out by July 2025. Backers weren't exactly happy to get their first playtest 6 months after they were promised a final physical product, and they were really unhappy to find out it was not a custom engine as the Kickstarter had claimed, but D&D 5e with the serial numbers inexpertly stripped off where it wasn't a direct copy and paste job. They were also none too pleased to find out the playtest was entirely focused on combat, when it wasn't explaining, badly, how to DM a session 0 discussing with your players how much Neopets sex and how kinky they were hoping the campaign would be. Or how the perks section read feats. The focus of the entire feedback form was initially blank, save for a single line. This work has not been paid for by John Taylor of Geekify. That's where I came into this Omni Shambles 2 weeks back. This week, things grew odder because Neopets issued their own statement on February 20th. While Geekify do have an official license and have been one of Neopets' primary merch partners since their relaunch as a distinct separate entity from their former parent companies, Jumpstart and NetDragon, Geekify did not have the right to add or change the established lore, or even publish anything, including the playtest, until the World of Neopia team had approved it. The Neopets team clarified that while they have been periodically reviewing submissions from Geekify, none of the aforementioned submissions was included in the beta document material released. The press release also made it clear they requested the playtest be taken down the second they heard it was live, implicitly on February 4th. I bring that up because the playtest was up, hosted as a Google Drive file, which gave all users commenting rights until February 9th. Also, yes, that's why any screenshots I have look like that. Oh, and did I mention Geekify also forgot to include the OGL disclaimer when their reskinned 5e playtest, which they expressly told backers wouldn't be a 5e reskin specifically because of the 2023-2024 OGL kerfuffle, launched, then slapped it down in 2 random spots after it was pointed out they'd forgotten it? Weird. It's almost like these guys don't know what they're doing. I wonder if there's an established but ignored pattern of exactly that. Haven't they run successful Kickstarters before? Let's check! We've got 1 failed and 3 funded past projects. Let's check the successful ones. First, a $3,000 2012 Kickstarter for a MIDI-controlled Tesla coil instruments, when the account was called John Taylor, which had no updates for 3 years before saying, yeah, we tried and it sucked on, seriously, April 1st, 2015? Wow. And no more updates till 2018, when the account's name was changed to Geekify. That's comforting. What about those 2 last unicorn ones? They're more recent, and they're even officially licensed projects too. Well, the Tarot deck launched in September 17th, funded in less than 2 days, and wrapped in October, raising more than 10 times their original goal. Weird. Just got a hit of deja vu there. Rewards were promised between December 17th and March 18th, so it was very normal and not at all a bad sign for their first update 5 days after the Kickstarter ended was titled Artist Wanted. Rewards did not begin shipping until May 2019. Well, they started the last Unicorn plushie Kickstarter in October 2019, so they had their shit together by then, right? Well, they only raised 118% of their goal this time, so the expectations were at least more reasonable. Or at least they might have started that way. They were still claiming they'd have the plushes and keychains in backers' hands by March 2020. I'm not petty enough to hold the COVID-19 global supply line disruptions against them. What I will hold against them is everything else since then. The Red Bull plushies finally shipped, if you only ordered a bull and nothing else, in April of 2023, which many backers alleged did not happen anyway, while everything else was going to ship ASAP. The next shipping update didn't come until July 2025, which estimated the remaining 2/3 of the plushies and all the keychains would finally ship in October. Yes, of course, the next update was in November, promising a December shipping date, and the update after that was last week on February 11th, promising an April 20th shipping date. Almost 6.5 years late if they actually ship this time. It's almost like Geekify has a long, documented history of wildly mismanaged Kickstarters, and I didn't even touch on the stretch goals for this one. Seriously, look at these. The first one, for raising $100,000, more than twice the original goal, was to produce PDF versions. The second one, for $125,000, adds character sheets. If you want to support a TTRPG Kickstarter focused on non-combat experiences with attainable goals and a proven track record, reminder that Soft Knot Week's Spirit Swap solo journaling TTRPG Kickstarter is running for another week and some, and has already reached their $5,000 goal. I originally saved Vet Visit for last this week because it's one of the few segments that doesn't nicely fit into my whole Cassandra / pattern recognition theming. Plus, there was only one story I really wanted to cover, and it's a fun dinosaur story, so it felt like the right thing to end on. So who's ready for exhaustive gushing and some paleontological history? Unfortunately, there are also Nazis in this story. Just seemed apt to end on something mostly genuinely fun after everything else the past couple of weeks. So, did you hear that there's a new Spinosaurus? Not even a new kissing cousin Spinosauridae, like Suchomimus or Baryonyx, but a full-blown new subspecies of proper Spinosaur. See, Spinosaurus has been in an odd spot for a while. The first fossils were collected in the 1910s and codified into an accepted species, Spinosaurus aegypticus, in 1915, largely by German paleontologist Ernst Stromer. Their samples came from digs across northern Africa, especially Egypt and Algeria. By 1944, Stromer was responsible for several incomplete Spinosaurus skeletons housed in the Bavarian Academy of Science Museum in Munich. Problem was, at least for the fossils, Stromer was fervently anti-Nazi. His career certainly suffered in the 1930s and 40s, but he was fairly protected himself, coming from an old German aristocratic family the Nazis couldn't outright move against. His fossils, less so. The museum curator, himself a fervent Nazi, refused to properly store the Spinosaurus fossils, instead leaving them on display, where they were destroyed when the British Air Force bombed Munich in late April 1944, leaving only scant photo evidence and Stromer's detailed notes, saved by the only son of his to survive World War II. The other two were conscripted by the Nazis to die on the Soviet front. New, but usually scattered and incomplete fossils of Spinosaurus aegypticus have been found basically since the 1980s in Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, as well as the Oxalia, a more distant Spinosauridae discovered in Brazil back in 2011. But proper game-changing Spinosaurus fossils have been few and far between for a while. And so we catch up with a modern era, where Paul Sereno and a team of 28 other paleontologists, mostly working out of the University of Chicago, have been excavating and reconstructing fossils in Niger since 2019, and in addition to terrifying things like a 12-foot-long freshwater fish, Sereno's team discovered a new species, dubbed Spinosaurus mirabilis. While Mirabilis was a contemporary of Aegypticus, the two are a bit different. The obvious being Mirabilis' distinctive head crest, but it goes a bit further. Aegypticus remains have been found in what were at the time mostly river deltas feeding into direct coastal regions, while the section of central Sahara Mirabilis was found in used to be a freshwater marshland. Possibly as a result of evolving in a slightly different biome, Mirabilis was not as long or tall as Aegypticus, The really cool thing about this, besides giving us some of the most complete skeletons since stromers were destroyed in World War II, all the stuff we can learn from having more complete samples. First, Serrano's team were able to analyze the composition of Mirabellis' teeth to prove their diet was predominantly made up of fish, but they absolutely ate dinosaurs as well. We've also got a more complete skull and can prove rather than assume Spinosauridae had long jaws filled with interdigitating teeth similar to modern crocodiles and alligators rather than the underbites better for cutting and tearing meat most theropods had. Daniel Vidal, another paleontologist on the team, called this jaw style a fish trap, as the teeth are better aligned for catching and holding prey rather than tearing chunks out of them. Mirabellis has also sparked new speculation as well. Spinosaurus fossils have been, well, considered denser than contemporary fossils, like the bones that became the fossils were denser. And Mirabellis continues that trend, arguably adding fuel to the argument that Spinosauruses were ambush predators, despite the massive size, because everything was massive at that time, who spent most of their time in the water, as dense bones are common adaptations in aquatic or semi-aquatic species who evolved from land animals like manatees and penguins, as it helps them maintain proper buoyancy. Serrano himself actually argues the fish trapper jaws, in addition to finding that new 12-foot-long freshwater fish species in the same marshland, implied Mirabellis was closer to a heron standing in the water, snapping at fish from above. Personally, and some of Serrano's team agree, it was likely a bit of both. When you're a nearly 13-meter-long super predator, you're gonna have to use every trick in the book to fill your belly. And we have survived what will, without a doubt, be my longest Muttday video unless I manage to edit this footage with a chainsaw, as the script is nearly, well, actually, since I wrote that bit, I know that it's now more than 10,000 words long. Yikes. Here's hoping this doesn't turn out like the DashCon 2 episode. If you haven't seen it, I'm linking it here. Please go watch it. I'm actually quite proud of it. But few of its stories worked well as YouTube shorts, so it wasn't watched anywhere near as much and didn't have as much advertising done by YouTube because YouTube pushes shorts and it's a whole thing. I think this might go similarly, mais c'est la vie. Or at least that was the plan finish when I declared the script initially finished, but then it didn't come out because they finally did it. Between my divorce, some poorly timed petty interpersonal drama, the rising cost of everything, my dog's autoimmune disease, and maybe the unrelated infection, or maybe totally related infection, discriminatory laws passed and cropping up in Kansas and the federal level, and the hellscape that is trying to find a job as a trans woman who's been doing shit like this instead of W-2 jobs for the last 7+ years. Yeah, they finally broke me a little bit. If you saw the one stream I tried to fire before having a complete breakdown last week, then... well, I mean, you saw, my mic was humped, the game audio was fine for chat while being borked for me. I completely lost my shit and had to end the stream after like 15-20 minutes. But I am still here. I got this show done. I'm still putting the pieces back together and figuring out how to work around the irreparable holes, but that's life. We don't usually get the time or the grace we need. I think I might have to change this show a bit going forward, immersing myself in all this without even the income to pay a mortgage or put food on the table. It's kind of too much. I don't have writers working on stories which I read, or editors finding all the images and doing the high-effort cuts and such. It's all me. And occasionally, Jules writing a one-off story or helping edit the scripts if I have them done early enough. So we might pivot a bit. Not ignore the evil, the fascism, the murders, and the suffering, but try and focus on more of the good, or at least the actionable evil, the things we can do something about. I realized during my breakdown, I haven't finished the Persephone Effect. I haven't read Unlimited Combat Dolls or Autumn's new Howl's Moving Castle-inspired book with a long isekai-style name I'm not going to say again, much less her 3-chapter Gunmetal Olympus cozy AU fic, The Little Owl Flower, or the Force Femme Dresden Files fanfic I've been staring hungrily at, or hells, even caught up with ranked competitive breast growth, or Marilyn Drew Necky's Trans Girl Senior Sleepover. I've talked a lot about how we need to not just survive, but live. and it's important to have a reason for continuing on. Spite and a desire to live as revenge against the will of oppressors may carry one through the worst, but it's not living, it's reacting, letting others set the game board and the rules. And that's the problem, is I haven't been following my own advice, obviously. I won't stop talking about the evil, the cruel, the petty, especially when I think I actually have something to say others might not have seen or thought of, but I need to live a little. I need to celebrate the good in people in this world, too. There's this comic, Ojoy Sex Toy and Funkit Toys, posted last week, which, while silly, helped remind me human beings don't suck by nature. For a more complete discussion of it, go check out this video's post on my site, fen.gay, where I don't have to worry about YouTube censors. We are social creatures. Well, sure, our very first tools were assuredly in aid of survival. The second generation were almost always about comfort, about enjoyment, about easing the suffering of those around us or sharing them with each other. The comic includes some of our most fun early inventions, like the first dildo, invented nearly 30,000 years ago, the first pornographic art, tens of thousands of years before we had developed written language, condoms, more than a millennia before the birth of that girly pup Christ, beer and bread before the concepts of war and borders. But it goes back even further. Most human beings, even those we'd struggle to recognize as such, have always cared about one another. We often merely lack the ability to help them, be it for lack of knowledge, power, or due to the direct machinations of those directing our societies. We have been trying to care for each other for as long as we can tell. In 2008, Zabok General Hospital in Croatia published their study of 135,000-year-old Neanderthal bones and found evidence of medical treatments it was simply impossible to self-apply. The successful setting of broken bones in the head, arms, and legs, and the admittedly often less successful attempts at amputation. While the amputations consistently did not go great, even now, those can be pretty hit or miss if the cause is too widespread or traumatic. Those who survived the broken bones or amputations would need to be cared for by others while they recuperated, and they were. They recovered because other Neanderthals helped them, not for money as we understand it, but because we are social creatures. The pack, the herd, the group is stronger as a unit than any one member could ever be on their own. And that's also one of the things that the Epstein class and billionaires fear that you acknowledge. That's why we pack bond with cats, dogs, birds, tortoises, snakes, Roombas, chatbots we know aren't sapient. I don't even mean the current LLMs either, but even simple toys like I already brought up Cleverbot or Joseph Weizenbaum's 1967 chatbot Eliza. We're empathic creatures. We care about our fellow beings, be they human, animal, or tool that we've come to care for and personify. We have to be trained, sometimes subtly, sometimes not, to hate, to exploit, to treat others as lesser or expendable. We have to train soldiers and cops to kill, to harm. And more often than not, doing so breaks them in ways they'll never fully recover from. If you'd like a perfect example, go watch the first Jarhead movie, or Dan Olson's video, linked here, on how a semi-biographical movie on the ways the US military, and specifically Marine, training intentionally destroys men in a way that many feel they can never fully recover from. And how that somehow turned into 3 sequels jerking off the same military, doing the same thing to those men. Well, that outro was longer than normal, eh? And I haven't even gotten to this week's schedule. First up, today I'm probably live right now watching the 6th episode of Digimon Beat Break in my Discord server, link in the description, or playing Zero Ranger on Twitch, link also in the description. It's injection day, and I have to keep the trend going, or I'll start slipping. So, there will also be more Spy X Family in the Discord tonight. I think we're finally going to be finishing the third season, so next week should be different. On Tuesday the 3rd and Wednesday the 4th, I'll be running longer streams starting at 1 p.m. Mountain Time and going for at least 4 hours, though I will be aiming for 6 or 8. Continuing my first playthrough of Nier Automata, and on Thursday, starting my first of Devil May Cry. On Saturday the 7th, there will be another Injection Day, 7:30 a.m. Beat Break watch party in the Discord, /8 a.m. Zero Ranger stream on Twitch, before I duck back into the production mines to get a much, much smaller Muttday done for March 9th, if I can help it. The rest of this week is going to be prepping for the next show, which will be much shorter and focus more on things I and you all can affect, and those things we can celebrate or discuss. I'll also say right now, the next week, starting on the 9th, is going to be rough for me. Between potential jury duty, my first court appearance for my ongoing divorce, and the building of my late March birthday that I'm not exactly looking forward to. So things might be a little light next week. Yeah, thank you all for watching. If you like the show, please like and comment, and you can subscribe and dingle the bingle to see more of what I do. And as a reminder, everything I do, written, video, or streamed, is all brought to you by you and viewers like you. Thank you very much to April, Fragile Paper, Pinball Witch, Pimento, Yalk, Rose, Writer Princess. I literally could not do this without all of y'all. Thank you so very much. You can support everything I do over at patreon.com/fen or coffee.com/fen. That's PHENN. Yeah, I will see you all soon.